We just saw that great scene from the 1989 movie Dead Poets Society starring Robin Williams, and it's important for us to look at because what I just told you about consanity and the golden mean makes me sound uncomfortably like this fellow James Everett Pritchard, which the writers invented, who actually is based upon someone who really did live. His name was Lawrence Perrine. He died in 1995, and his Sound and Sense and Story and Structure was published in 1956 and became a very well-used book in American high school and even college education. Now, you cannot make a list of things to check off, and this is a great work of art if it has this, and it's not a great work of art if it has that, and it's a mediocre work of art if it's got half of this and more of that. That, of course, is absurd, and those kinds of pages on books deserve to be torn out. But as we're going to see, having acknowledged that doesn't mean that great works of art do not share, really do share, characteristics, and characteristics which can be described really fairly objectively. So while I really admire that scene and it's useful, remember, it's a great scene in a movie and not necessarily 100% helpful. Now, we're going to go back to the prelude. That's where we started, and that's where we need to end up. And I want to go back to those 3 chords with sevenths that I talked about before. Here is that first one. Here is that second one. And here is that last one. They're all that very, very unusual major chord with major seventh. Now, that chord does appear, obviously, in the 18th century. We're looking at examples of it, but it is still very, very rare. And I want to talk to you now about them in greater detail. That is, those bars represent, those lines represent bars in a Bach's piece. And in measure 8, we have this chord, we saw it before. And in measure 16, we have this chord. And in measure 21, we have that chord. But what you haven't seen before are these arches. If you take 35, there are 35 measures right in the piece, 35, and multiply it times 0.618, which is the ratio of the golden mean, you get a number. And that number is 21 with some decimal points. Now what that means is that from here to here, the golden mean of that distance is 21. Then, if we take this distance and go backwards, if we treat this as a unit and multiply the numbers 21 times 1, we get another number, and we count that back, and that puts us in measure 8. If we then take this unit, 16, and we multiply that times 0.618, and we go forward, that gives us, if we give this other unit, this gives us an event on measure 8. Now, these are numbers with decimals. I can put them up, and you can see the arithmetic in the notes. But that's really interesting, because what we have found out is that each of these very, very unusual chords articulates and marks one of the golden mean events of the entire piece. Now, what would happen if this piece were 34 measures long, or if this piece were 36? None of this arithmetic would work. None of that arithmetic would work. This structure, this highly artificial, devised, engineered, and that's an important word to use, engineered structure, would start to fall apart. It's not just that this piece apparently is constructed according to these principles of the golden mean, it's that also there is a logic in the way in which Bach presents that. That first chord, which we have in measure 8, is a subdominant in the key in which we're going. Technically, we call that the subdominant 4/2 in the key of G. And that dissonant interval is between the first and the second sounding pitch. The second time Bach gives us, here, it's the subdominant 4/2, or the subdominant 7th and 3rd inversion, going back to the key of C. So both of these cases, the function, using the harmonic jargon, the function is the same. And on both of them, that most dissonant interval is right next to each other. It's a minor second. It's a minor second of B and C, and then E and F. And then at the golden mean of the entire piece, Bach gives us this. But now, that seventh in this case isn't right here, the first two pitches right next to each other. What would be the opposite, the logical opposite of having that really strong dissonance at the very beginning right next to each other? Well, the logical opposite would be to have them at the opposite, far away from each other. So rather than a lot like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The last time Bach has it, we have this octave first, and then the dissonant pitch is exploded. It's as far away from each other as Bach can put it. And it's not in this third inversion, 4/2 inversion, but it is in root position. And then even further, from that point with the F in the bass, Bach reverses the direction in his bass line. The next pitch in the bass is this. And the bass starts to go up from F to F sharp to A flat and then to G, which becomes the pedal point to the end until Bach gives us a low C. So, what we have in this piece, and here's one of the autographs, what we have in this piece is a piece of music which is extraordinarily engineered. It's engineered. Frequently, when people think about composers, they think the composer sits down at the piano and thinks about his girlfriend and his boyfriend and the music of his country, or how he's angry with his mother, or something like that. It's the outpouring of the composer's soul, and that's true to an extent. But you also have to remember, as we see here, that the engineering of the piece is real engineering. It's like building a bridge. Now, what have we found out about those questions we asked at the beginning? What have we found out about the law of just enough? Why is this piece now 35 measures long? Because that's just enough. That's just enough. There's nothing excessive about it. What about these really bizarre chords? Why is Bach using them? Well, he's using them specifically in order to let us hear these important events as time moves by. And time, in the shape of measures of a piece, can be marked off according to the golden mean. And that's what's happening here. Now, the question you can ask is, did Bach do this intentionally, or was this done by accident or intuition? Ultimately, it doesn't make any difference. This exists. And whether it was done by intention or intuition or by accident doesn't affect the fact that it does exist, and I'm not making up anything when we look at it this way. But We don't have a lot of sketches about this piece with which we can reconstruct Bach's history of writing it, but with the prelude that begins the second volume of the Well-Tempered Clavier, Volume 2, the Prelude in C, we have several different versions of it, which we do know do come from Bach from his hand or one of his well-known copyists. And we can look at that prelude and look at the revisions that Bach made, and based upon those revisions can, with a fair degree of confidence, say, yes, Bach was aware of what this golden mean was, and each of those revisions that he made on that prelude brings it closer to those golden mean characteristics, which the final version of that prelude has. We don't have quite that history for this piece, but it doesn't mean that what we're looking at doesn't exist. This is an extraordinarily great piece of music. And at this point, in order for us to be kind of respectful at all, something has to happen that we tend not to do as much as we should. Everybody who teaches a music class has got to remember that the most important rule or characteristic is that nothing the teacher says is important as the music itself. The only reason I'm up here talking and any music teacher is talking is because the music is important. Nothing that a music professor or music teacher says is important as the music itself. So we need to listen to this piece again, but now knowing its architecture. I've taught this piece of music for about 35 years, and when I teach it, it usually comes in the second semester of what we call a music theory class. And we start that class actually by analyzing this piece. And I ask the students what they think of it, and the students are very nice students. They're well brought up and they're well behaved, and they say it's very nice, but it doesn't mean much to them. I then go over the piece again 15 weeks later, after we've had an opportunity to study what we just listened to today. And inevitably, the students' reaction to the piece at this point, having heard it now, is one where they're deeply moved. And they're deeply moved because they know a little bit more about music, having studied it for 15 years, but they're more deeply moved because they understand it so much better. And they understand this about this piece. They understand that this piece is perfect. Now, that's a really unusual word to use, perfect. Perfect means it's perfect. It can't be changed. Think about this piece. Can we improve this piece at all? Remember, I said a while ago that maybe this piece was too long, that maybe I could improve Bach by shortening it. No, I can't. If I change one note anywhere in this piece, one note, it's less than what it is. What if I change the octaves in which those pitches in the bass appear? I'm not changing the note, I'm simply changing the octave in which it appears. The piece is lessened, because even the placement, for instance, that low F, that low C, and that low F, where it goes down to F, that pitch in that octave, that low octave, has to be there because it's from there Bach goes to the F sharp, then to the A flat, and that articulates the bottom of that descent, and also that golden mean. Everything about this piece is perfect. Whoa! We're not used to talking about things being perfect at all. But this piece is perfect. Change it in any way, it starts to fall apart. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, and it's really, really important. But we're going to talk about integrity, absolute evil, and the really, really good liar. Now, let's go back to the rule of just enough and the business of the bridge. And I mentioned at that point the word integrity. And this is a word that engineers use, and it describes, engineers use it, and it's obvious. I'm not an engineer, so I'm just using it the way which I'm told it's used. Engineers use this to describe something which does what it's supposed to do. For instance, there are some chairs up here. We can say that this chair has integrity if I can sit on it with a fair amount of knowledge that I won't fall on the floor, that it won't damage me, that it won't hurt me. We can say that chair has integrity. About 25 years ago, there was a very famous accident on Interstate 95, which is the interstate which goes up and down the eastern seaboard. And in Connecticut, Interstate 95 crossed a river in Connecticut. And because it's right on the seaboard, there's a lot of corrosion with salt air. And this was a standard bridge with partitions which were held by pylons, and the partitions were held by huge bolts. The sections were held by huge bolts. And one of those bolts became so corroded that it gave way. In other words, the bridge lost its integrity. And one whole section of this bridge, I think it was across the Miamis River, one of those whole sections collapsed into the river. Now, fortunately, at least for some people, fortunately, this happened about 2 o'clock in the morning. And so there weren't that many people killed on it. But had this happened at 5 or 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, hundreds of people would have lost their lives as they went off the interstate into the river. Now, what caused this to happen? Well, that bolt, that one little bolt, it was about like this big bolt, lost its integrity. It became sheared and the bridge collapsed. For things to work, they need integrity. They need integrity. For the bridge to hold, it needs integrity. For the chair to hold me, it's got to have some integrity. Now, I can put it up on the wall and call it a sculpture in which it'll have a different kind of integrity, but for the chair, it's got to hold me up to have integrity. Now, let's posit the existence of evil. You may come from a religious tradition, you may not, doesn't make any difference. Let's just posit or suggest a thing like evil exists, like we might tell a children's story and say there's a thing like a unicorn. Now, what are the characteristics of evil? Why don't you think of a really evil person? Well, as a Calvinist, I would just say, think about me, and I might want to suggest think about you, but you don't have to go down that road. Just think about somebody who's really, 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 really evil. And you can choose who you want. Now, one of the things that the Greeks did a long time ago was to try to look at their world and come up with a notion of what is the most important thing. And one of the things that the Greeks did is they looked at our existence and they tried to see what is the biggest characteristic of our existence. They came up with the idea of change. They said that everything we experience changes. Therefore, change is a primary characteristic of our existence, at least as human beings. Now, what is the primary characteristic, using that kind of tradition, of evil? Well, let's think about a really, really good liar. Now, what is it that makes a really, really, really good liar a successful liar? Well, he's not found out. And I'll use he, because in my experience, men are much better liars than women. But you don't have to go down that sexist role. But let's say that it is a he, and he's a really, really good liar, because he's not found out. What is the primary characteristic of a bad liar? Well, he's found out. So what does the really, really good liar have to be able to do? Well, the odd thing is that the really, really good liar has got to be able to tell the truth. How can you tell if somebody's a liar? Well, because you don't trust anything they say, right? You can tell they're a liar because they're never trustworthy. But somebody who's a really, really, really good liar is trustworthy a lot of the time, isn't he? And he's so trustworthy that you can't tell when he's lying, right? So the odd thing about a really, really, really good liar is that most of the time he's a really, really good truth teller, right? And when he fails to be a really good liar, it's when he's failing to tell the truth enough. You see this? This is really odd. Now that's an insight into the fundamental character of evil. Evil cannot have integrity. Think about the really, really good liar. What's the problem with the really, really good liar? Is that he doesn't have complete integrity in himself because he's telling lies as well as telling the truth. And the only reason he can get away with telling lies is that telling the truth exists, a kind of a metaphysical condition. People can tell the truth. Truth-telling does exist. And the liar's existence is entirely parasitic upon the culture of truth-telling. This helps us understand that the liar cannot have integrity because you cannot be a pure liar. The primary characteristic, or the characteristic of evil, is that it can't be completely evil. It is parasitic on goodness. Now, if we move just a little further, we can ask ourselves, if that is the primary characteristic of evil, the fact that evil cannot have integrity, what is the primary characteristic of goodness? Utter integrity. Do you see how that works? It's the opposite of evil. Evil cannot have integrity. What is the primary characteristic of goodness? Goodness has utter and complete integrity. So the primary characteristic of goodness is this integrity. Everything about it has integrity. Now, I'd like to show you a clip from a movie many of you have seen. This movie is Schindler's List. Let me get our electronics going here. And our lights down. This is Schindler's List.
I don't understand. You want these people?
These people, my people, I want my people.
Who are you, Moses? Come on, what is this? Oh, where's the money on this? Where's the scam?
It's good business.
Yeah, it's good business in your opinion. Look, you've got to move them. The equipment, everything to Czechoslovakia. Pay for all that and build another camp. Doesn't make any sense.
Look,
you're not telling me.
It's good for me. I know them. I'm familiar with them. I don't have to train them. It's good for you. I'll compensate you.
Yeah, that's right.
It's good for the army.
Yeah, of course.
You know what I'm going to make?
What?
Artillery shells.
Everyone's making artillery.
Tank shells. They
Yeah,
need them. Everybody's happy.
Everyone's happy, except me. I mean, they're probably scamming me somehow. If I'm making 100, you've got to be making 3. And if it's not making 3, then it's 4, actually. But how?
I just told you.
I did, that's what I did. Yeah, all right, don't tell me. I'll go along with it. It's just irritating, I can't work it out.
Look, all you have to do is tell me what it's worth to you. What's a person worth?
No. What's one worth to you?
Ulrich Pepperberg, Mila Pepperberg, and Stegel, Tau Stegel. The investors, I want all of them.
Yes, sir.
Fischer, Ishmael Fischer,
Ishmael.
Toshev, Sharf.
Moment, sir. I'm sorry, sir.
Come on, Stegel, Sharf. The children, all the children. How many?
100, 150.
More, come on. Wein, Wolfwein.
Jakob, Wegenbaum. Wegenbaum, Ludwig, Jakob, Nacha. Yes? Necha.
Necha, that's right. And Wolf. How many?
600.
More. You can do the same thing I'm doing. You might even make money at it.
I don't know.
Come on, Julius. I know about the extra food and clothes you give them paid for out of your own pocket. If we make a combined approach, we could get more than 4,000 out, mine and yours.
Pascal.
We could relocate them in something like safety in Moravia.
I don't know. How many cigarettes have you smoked tonight?
Too many.
For everyone you smoke, I smoke half.
I've done all I can.
I will not accept that.
No, Oscar, I can't do
I
any
will
more.
not accept that.
No.
850, give or take.
Give or take what, Stern? Give or take what? Count them. How many? That's it. You can finish that page.
What did Gerd say about this? You just told him how many people you needed and you're not buying them. You're buying them, you're paying him for each of these names.
If you were still working for me, I'd expect you to talk me out of it. It's costing me a fortune. Finish the page and leave one space at the bottom.
You. The list is an absolute good. The list is life. All around its margins lies the gulf.
I'd like to introduce a term to you. Some of you may know it. This term is mitzvah. It's a Hebrew word. It's a word which is well known to all Jews. A mitzvah, the plural is mitzvot, is a term which is used for the commandments of what Christians call the Old Testament and Jews the Torah. It refers to the 613 commandments given in the Torah from the lips of God. By extension, the rabbis have also said that it can be any sort of moral deed performed as a religious duty, or by extension, any act of pure goodness is a mitzvah. If you remember that scene from Schindler's List, and let me move the slide forward. If you remember this scene, look what the director has done with the lighting. What is the source of the light here? I mean, it's amazing. The light is hidden. But it is on the list, and the list illumines the room. This is the greatest picture I have ever seen of a mitzvah. And I'm pretty sure the director knew exactly what he was doing with this, although he's never commented on it this way. The list illumines the room, and what Schindler has done in this act is a mitzvah. It's an act of complete goodness. Now, let's go back to the prelude. Why is that prelude important? Well, it's important because it is characterized by utter and complete integrity. Can that prelude, this little piece of music, this little work of art, can it be improved in any way whatsoever? No. It's absolutely, in every detail, completely perfect. It is characterized by utter integrity on every single level. And because of that, it's an absolute good. The prelude is an absolute good. And because it's an absolute good, that prelude is a mitzvah. It's like, in this sense, one of the commandments of God. It's like an act of generosity. It is an absolute good. It is completely and utterly perfect. That prelude pushes back the darkness that surrounds it. Like a mitzvah, the prelude is not divine in itself, but it testifies to the divine. Just like in the way that scene was set up, the list is not light itself, but the way that scene is lit, it testifies to the light. It throws the light back onto the scene. Our own mitzvot, acts of goodness, digging wells, paving highways, inventing devices that save labor, promulgating fair laws and dealing justly with others, helping the powerless, paying our fair share, all of these things, these are all ways of driving back the darkness. Because I don't have to tell you, you know maybe even better than I do, there is darkness, real darkness. Our greatest works of art are mitzvot. They are great in their complete and utter integrity. And perhaps because they are of so much more limited scale than something big like a drainage project or a factory or a legal code, and we can thus work on them more minutely and more finely and for a longer time. Because of this, some of us can sometimes make a work of art perfect. We apparently are capable of doing perfect things. I am not inventing this. I am not making this up. That prelude exists. It is not an item of my fantasy. It is perfect. We are capable of doing perfect things. Now, if we are capable of doing perfect things, aren't those perfect things worthy of preservation and emulation? Absolutely. But we are capable of perfect things. And maybe when we do something huge, like Hoover Dam, or as that wonderfully ironic scene from the second part of Faust, when Faust drains the the marshes in northern Germany. These huge projects we don't have complete control over, but when we have a little work of art, like a little prelude, we do have complete control over that. And at least on those things, we can really make it perfect. Hoover Dam, draining the marshes, these can be mitzvot. These are laudable things, but they aren't necessarily perfect like we can make a little prelude perfect. Now, there's a barb here, and it's a nasty little barb, but it's one we have to acknowledge. Maybe you've noticed that artist types are frequently irascible and unpleasant, and prone to all sorts of bad behavior. Have you noticed this about artistic types? That's true, we are. But I have to tell you one reason why. Bach was not a perfect man. Yet he was capable of making a prelude that's perfect. When you create a work of art that is perfect, you are stuck in a very torturous situation, because that work of art looks back at you and it says, I am perfect and you are not. The work of art, by its very existence, judges the artist and is a testimony to not only what the artist can do and is capable of, but is also incapable of. And so when the artist finishes a work of art that is utterly perfect, there's no joy. There really isn't. There's gratitude that it's finished, but you recognize with every perfect work of art you finish that that work of art looks back at you and says, I am perfect and ye are not. And the little unasked rhetorical question is, why can't you make yourself as perfect as your art? And that's what you could call kind of uncomfortable. And it's that recognition, whether it's spoken or not, that drives a lot of artists to bad behavior, for lack of a better term. So there's always this barb in the work of art, at least for the artist, him or herself. But recognizing that barb, and it's an important barb, we've come up to the mountain. Remember we started a while ago and talked about a hike up the mountain, and why do you want to hike up the mountain? Well, it's because you want to have a view from the top. I mean, there are other ways you can get exercise. You can go on the treadmill in the gym that's air conditioned, right? So you walk on the mountain, you're at the top, and that's where we are now. I told you we'd get to the top. And we're there. And this is the top. I have an answer. We have an answer for Yale. We have an answer for Fred. Remember Fred? Fred's the young person who is in charge of one of the most important artistic establishments in Europe. And Fred is the one who collapsed in tears. Remember Fred? And we have an answer for Pat. And it's a really, really important answer. And the answer is that the reason why, well, to answer my question to Pat, is if you have a choice to give money to the Vanderbilt Children's Hospital or to the National Symphony, if you're a decent human being, you give money to the Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, okay? That's what you do. But if you have an excess of money, why should you give it to the National Symphony? And it's not because the National Symphony exists. It is because that organization exists and it can play extraordinarily beautiful, perfect works of art, which are the triumphs or the best parts of our humanity. Now, we looked at that Bach prelude. We could also look at the Eroica Symphony by Beethoven. We could also look at Tristan und Isolde. We could also look at the Avenue of a Faun. There are a lot of these pieces that exemplify these aspects of perfection. And the Nashville Symphony or the Chicago Symphony or the New York Philharmonic or the Berlin Philharmonic or La Scala or Bayreuth are not justified to exist simply because they exist, but it's because that they are settings for extraordinarily important, in this case, music that pushes back the darkness. It doesn't overwhelm the darkness. Schindler wasn't able to save 6 million Jews, but he was able to save 1,000. And just temporarily, for a moment, our greatest works of art testify to the fact that we can push back the darkness a little. And for Pat, the answer to his question is, why should we support it? The Nashville Symphony or other symphonies? Well, to push back the darkness. And what is so sad about that presentation from Yale is I would think Yale would know, because I learned this at Yale. I think what Yale would know or would remember that the reason that Yale has music isn't simply must, which is the attitude of a 3-year-old, but because the music itself helps push back the darkness. It helps push back the darkness. At Refiner's Fire, we have a motto, music that matters. And again, I want to remind you that we're somewhat disingenuous with that. It's not that music matters. Music is like cement blocks that we have on these walls. They simply exist. What is important is great music matters, and it matters a great deal. And I want to go back to that last thing, that little verse from Exodus, that there arose in Egypt a king who knew not Joseph. What we need to remember is why our music is so important, our greatest music, because it pushes back the darkness. Music matters. Great music matters a great, great deal. That's it.